So what makes a metabolism fast or slow? When I think of a metabolism, I think of the balance between the breakdown and the building of substrates within the body. So for example, if we are breaking down glucose that we've eaten, we're turning it into energy. If we are adding to what we have stored on our body, it might be, for example, using lipids that we've eaten, putting them together and storing them as body fat. So when we're thinking about something that is going to increase our metabolism, I would think about a situation in which we are taking the fuels that we have stored on our body and we are breaking them down to form energy. This is actually going to cause things like weight loss. So what are the things in the body that are going to take our stored fuel substrates like glucose or glycogen in its storage form, fat and amino acids, and turn them into energy and essentially increase our metabolism? Well, we need to think about hormones, and we need to think about neurotransmitters, and we need to think about organs that are also going to increase energy usage. So first thing we need to think about are our stress chemicals. So they're going to be cortisol, adrenaline and noradrenaline, or epinephrine and norepinephrine in the US. So essentially cortisol is going to stimulate the production of more receptors to increase the sensitivity of adrenaline and noradrenaline. They're also going to increase the enzymatic activity that will allow the breakdown of fuel substrates. So this is worthwhile keeping in mind. These are going to be raised in stress situations or if you're in a fasted state. So another cool peptide that is going to be released only when we're in a fasted state and insulin is low is glucagon. Glucagon kind of does a similar thing to cortisol and adrenaline and noradrenaline. It's basically going to go over to the parts of the body that are storing our fuel sources, like our muscle, our fat tissue, and it's going to stimulate them to be broken down. What about other hormones? So hormones play a really, really big role in breaking down our fuel substrates and increasing our metabolism. So we do need to consider our sex hormones. Specifically, testosterone is useful in this case, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but it's going to stimulate the production of more tissue like muscle that is going to increase our metabolism via needing to break down more of our fuel substrates to make energy. But there are other hormones that are really, really important here. First one is thyroid hormone. What does thyroid hormone do? So on all the cells of our body, we have this thing called the sodium-potassium pumps. And essentially what they are doing is they're going to be pumping sodium out of the cell and pumping potassium into the cell. Long story short, this process is required for all cells to just basically do their processes. I won't go too far into it. But every single time this pump is pumping, it requires energy. So what the thyroid hormone is going to do is it's going to go to the cells and tell them to create more sodium potassium pumps. This is going to require more energy. And where do we get that energy from? Well, we take the fuels that we have on our body and we put them into these cells so they can use them to create ATP, which fuel these sodium potassium pumps. So in other words, the more of these pumps that you can create, the more energy you need to break down and use. So thyroid hormone, in short, is going to create more of these pumps, and this is going to make us actually create more energy. And this is why you will often hear people say that if you have low thyroid activity, you're going to basically have a slower metabolism. So last but not least, and this is actually my favorite just because it's so interesting, is growth hormone. So growth hormone is kind of going to do a similar thing to our stress hormones and peptides, and it's basically just going to go to the tissues that we have in our body that we have stored substrates like our fat tissue and our muscle, and start breaking down our fuel substrates. So breaking down the glycogen and breaking down our fat tissue. It's going to do this by increasing the activity of enzymes and things like that. Things that are going to start snipping up, for example, fatty acids and make them available as energy. But there's something that is really intriguing about growth hormone is that it, number one, is both anabolic and catabolic. So this means it not only is able to stimulate the uptake of amino acids into muscle tissue, so it's going to help build new muscle tissue, But it, as I said, is also going to be catabolic, which means it also is going to help with the breakdown of tissue. I think this is really interesting because this is something that we don't usually see in hormones. Usually they kind of either are going to be anabolic and build things, or they're going to be catabolic, and essentially like glucagon and insulin, they work sort of like a seesaw action where one is turned on, the other is turned off. So as I said, if glucagon is on, insulin is off. If insulin is on, glucagon is off. But unlike the others, growth hormone is both anabolic and causes the building of tissues, and catabolic, which causes the breakdown of tissues. I think this is really interesting. So growth hormone sounds pretty cool, right? How do we stimulate more? Well, this is what's interesting. In order to stimulate growth hormone, you have to have low levels of glucose and low levels of fatty acids. So this means, in other words, in a fasted state. Fascinating. So there's two other things that are really important for increasing our metabolism, and that is having a lot of muscle mass, kind of the more the better. And that's because muscle is a massive energy hog. It contains a lot of mitochondria, and so it's going to perform a lot of catabolism breakdown in order to make ATP. Another thing is brown fat, and that's because brown fat contains also a lot of mitochondria, and as I just said, this is where we make energy. So the more mitochondria we have, the more fuel substrates we're able to bring in, break them down. So in essence, what we need to think about here is that there is more going on than just calories in, calories out. Yes, if you create a demand, as in you increase your calories, there is more of a demand for more enzymes and things like that to break down more fuel substrates. But you also have to be in a situation where you're telling your body that we need to use what we have stored and break it down. So this is being in a fasted state, and this is also having the right amounts of hormones available that are going to cause this breakdown in our stored fuel substrates. Something that I think is very interesting and that people don't really think enough about, maybe outside of the low carb community, is insulin. Now, we know that insulin is an anabolic hormone. It is very important. We need it. And if we don't have any of it, this is essentially type 1 diabetes, and you just will essentially waste away if you don't have insulin. It helps to build muscle tissue, etc., etc. But what we need to also consider is that whenever insulin is turned on, the other hormones that are going to cause catabolism or breakdown of stored fuels are going to be switched off.